Hi, and welcome to video 18. We're calling this one Blackness Visible. This is the first of two videos on the social construction of race and the Charles Mills essay, But What Are You Really? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some sort of basic concepts in this video and tie them back to the Henrietta Lacks book, and then you're going to do an exercise where you dive into the deeper concepts. So the question here is about the reality of race, right? And this was raised in the book by a couple of different concepts, a couple of different incidences, facts, weird things. One is when Skloot goes to visit Clover, and she talks to both the white Laxes and the black Laxes. And the white Laxes insist that all the people in the town with the last name Lax who are black are just not their kin. But it's pretty clear when Skloot goes through the family history that they absolutely are kin, right? The white and black Laxes are members of the same family. And so this indicates actually a certain reality to race. A reality that goes against what the white Laxes think and into what the black and in favor of what the black Laxes face. But at the same time, the lives of the two sides of the family are extremely different. Their experiences are different, and we can easily imagine that two individuals taken from either side of the family, either the white side or the black side, may wind up having roughly the same genetic background, depending upon how you decide to measure the genes, right? Or they could, from a biological perspective, be more or less the same, and yet their lived experience of race is completely different. Okay. Another example comes up in that, which is the story of Lillian Lax, who, quote-unquote, converted to Puerto Rican. Basically, she was light-skinned enough to pass, and so she did. And as one of the people that Skloot interviews says, she didn't want to be black no more. This gives you a sense of unreality of race. That is, it's something you can just shake off, perhaps successfully or unsuccessfully. I also showed a video of another town, East Jackson, that was covered by the Guardian newspaper, which looks like a town similar to Clover in that you've got people who are identifying as black who seem completely who are visibly white, right? No different than the white residents of the nearby town. In fact, they have the same ancestry as the white residents of the nearby town. And one of the women in that video explains that she's black in part because she was raised black. And so that gives you another idea of what blackness might be. So with that in mind, I want to turn to this Charles Mills essay. And I'm going to actually start by reading you some passages from the beginning of the book that this is taken from, where he tries to explain why he writes on what we're going to call the metaphysics of race. Right? So he begins, since its emergence as a major social category several hundred years ago, race has been paradigmatically thought to be natural. Actually, let me unpack this a bit for a second. One of the bits of historical background that Mills takes for granted is that our idea of race was invented fairly recently in historical terms, several hundred years ago. In fact, the notion of the world can be divided into black people and white people is a product of the transatlantic slave trade. It was needed, this new social division was needed to justify the enslavement of Africans after a period of time in which slavery was not practiced in Europe. The Roman Empire kept slaves, but in Christian medieval Europe, slavery was not practiced. The reintroduction of slavery required a rationalization. And so the categories, we started dividing human beings into these categories of white and black. And as Mills points out, when people started doing this, it was thought that it was proposed as if these were biologically real categories. They were natural. They were just part of the nature, part of the species, and they might be justified biblically, sons of Ham and sons of other biblical people, or it might be justified evolutionarily later on. But the idea was that this racial divide had some biological reality to it. So this notion that there's biological reality to race is discredited, right? And so Mills goes on to say the discrediting of old-fashioned racism of this sort has made it a truism in liberal intellectual services, has made a truism in liberal intellectual circles of a claim that would have seemed quite revolutionary. Race doesn't really exist, right? Okay, there's no biological reality to race, therefore race doesn't exist. And that is the natural way. So Mills, I should say, is an African American scholar. And so when he's dealing with his white contemporaries, he finds that they simply say, well, now that we know that race doesn't exist, we can just ignore it. So the highlighted part, Mills says, almost overnight, race goes from being in the body to being in the head, and one shows one's liberal commitment to bringing about a colorblind society by acting as if it, the colorblind society, already exists, not seeing race at all, and congratulating oneself on one's lack of vision. So he's complaining about this phrase you still hear quite often, oh, I don't see race. And he's pointing out that if you don't see race, you're going to miss a lot of problems. But what is it that you're seeing when you're seeing race, if you're not seeing something that's biologically real? What needs to be shown, Mills says, and what I try to show in this book, is that room has to be made for race being both real and unreal. And everything we're going to be talking about after that is unpacking this, right? What he wants to say is that race is something that is created. So this is the significance of the critical in the concept of critical race theory, to make plausible a social ontology that is neither innate nor transhistorical, but real enough for all that. Oh, that was a big mouthful. What does he really mean? What he means is race was invented. Race was invented by the transatlantic slave trade. It's not a biological category. It's a social category that came into existence and can also hypothetically go out of existence. To understand the importance of race as a social category, Mills introduces this interesting idea. He calls it quace. So imagine that we're not talking about race anymore. We're talking about some related idea. We're going to call it quace. This is an imaginary system of classifying people, and is like race, but it's not tied to any system of any form of systematic oppression. You can get categorized into groups 1, 2, or 3. You're categorized at birth, and it doesn't really make a difference for your life outcomes, how you were categorized at birth. So what he says is that Quace is a horizontal system, whereas race is a vertical system. There's a racial hierarchy, whereas this is just 3 classifications lying in a row. And Mills suggests that in the Quace system, the question, what are you really, could be asked, but no one would really think it was important. So let's go back to this again. Let's go back to our original examples. Lillian converts to Puerto Rican. That is, she marries a Puerto Rican man and starts identifying as Puerto Rican. But you might say she's passing, and someone could ask her, but what are you really? And the expected answer would be, well, really, I'm black. We now imagine a different system where we just sort people into 3 categories, 1, 2, 3. We could still ask the question, what are you really? And it may be that someone who was sorted into category 1 at the beginning of their life is now trying to pass themselves off as category 2. But no one would care. No one would care because it's a horizontal system. There's no power involved, right? So the first thing to understand about race was that it was a product of the transatlantic slave trade. It was a category that people made up to justify slavery. The second thing to note is that this category continues to have social power. It continues to mean something to people because there is systematic racial oppression. If it were really just random, people wouldn't care if you try to pass yourself off as something that you're not. All right. To understand what's going on with the idea that race is both real and unreal, I want to introduce a pretty basic distinction. But I want to talk about the difference between physical reality and social reality. And the way I'm going to talk about it is fairly simplified. It's simplified even from the way Mills talks about it. But I find that this is good enough for most purposes. And trying to make things more complicated doesn't always help. Basically, there is physical reality and there is social reality. And physical reality has one really important property. Physical reality doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. That's actually an old definition of real from a science fiction author, Philip K. Dick. Something is real if it doesn't go away just because you stop believing in it. So you might say COVID is a hoax, but it's not going to go away because you stop believing in it, and you're still going to get sick. On the other hand, social reality is real in that you have to deal with it. And if you as an individual decide you don't believe in it, it doesn't go away. But it will go away if enough of the right people stop believing in it. So somehow it's tied to human belief, but it's not tied to your individual belief. So, for instance, money is a form of social reality. I can say I don't believe in it, but I'm still going to be broke, right? But if enough people stop believing in it, if people lose faith, for instance, in a currency, it will go away. So when people talk about social construction, that's generally what they mean. They mean that it is a reality that exists because enough of the right people with power believe in it. So I gave you an exercise where I asked you to sort things based on their reality, and that may have been an odd thing to ask, but hopefully you were able to do something intuitive with it. I'm just going to talk through that exercise to give you some examples. So to my mind, the easiest example of the difference between physical reality and social reality is the difference between the first two items on this list: the Rio Grande and the border between Texas and Mexico. The Rio Grande is physical reality. It's a river. The way I think about physical reality these days actually is it's a causal process, right? Water evaporates in the Gulf of Mexico. It rains down in the Rocky Mountains, and it flows back into the Gulf of Mexico. There's this cycle of water, and you can say, I don't believe in the Rio Grande, but it's going to continue, that water is going to continue to cycle. The border between Texas and Mexico is different. It's social reality. It's a social construct. It doesn't have to be there. It is the product, among other things, of a bunch of wars and treaties. It's also a product of the fact that there are guards who set themselves up on either side of the border and, have this practice of letting some people through and not others, right? To destroy the Rio Grande, you'd have to build a huge dam. You'd have to move water. To destroy the Texas-Mexico border, you'd have to negotiate a new treaty between Texas and Mexico, between the United States and Mexico. So the question is, what sorts of things are more like the Rio Grande, and what sorts of things are like the border between Texas and Mexico? So I give you this graphic here because I think this is actually pretty interesting. This is GPS data on some wolf packs. Humans aren't the only animals that have territory. Wolves mark territory. And so here are the territories of six packs of wolves, probably marked with like urine or something. But again, you have borders. That looks like a social reality. I'm going to try and sort some things here. Let's just do this. So, oops, it's not going to let me do that. Let's just try it like this. So first I'm going to delete the picture. And then I'm going to put things in different categories. So one category is going to be physical reality. And we're going to put the Rio Grande there. Another category is going to be social reality. And we're going to put the Texas-Mexico border there. And I'm just going to delete everything else here for a second. Okay, so what else are we looking at here? We want to delete the border from the physical reality side. Well, for starters, there are things that are genuinely fictions on my list. Unicorns. Those are things that aren't real at all, or they exist only in stories. That's a third kind of reality that's going to be kind of complicated. So we'll move this down. We'll just put it here. Fictions. Dragons and unicorns. Right, we can delete them from physical reality. Another one that belongs in physical reality is the moon. But I want to take a second and talk about actually the fact that physical reality itself is a complicated idea. You can say the moon won't go away if you stop believing in it. There are, however, a lot of, the idea of something being a moon can be thought of as a social category. So, for instance, there are a lot of little rocks in space they call quasi-satellites. And these are asteroids that are in the same orbit as Earth is, and at various times pass in and out from one side to the other of Earth's orbit. So effectively, over the course of the year, they make an orbit around the Earth. So this is a nifty illustration of this. This is from the science website, earthsky.org. You've got this asteroid, and I don't know quite how to pronounce it, Kruthny, but it, orbits the sun in something that overlaps Earth's orbit, and if you just look at the diagram, you can see at various times it manages to make a full circle around the Earth over the course of a year. We call this a quasi-satellite. It is not a moon, but this is a decision that we made. It's similar to the decision to reclassify Pluto as a minor planet rather than a planet. So objects in physical reality, even, big solid objects like asteroids and moons and planets, are related to social construction in that we file them away into categories that are socially constructed. But that doesn't mean that the physical reality is socially constructed, at least according to people who agree with me. And for our purposes, if we want to talk about pure social constructs like race, it's good to be able to contrast them with things like the moon and quasi-satellites, which have physical reality in a way that the social reality does not. All right, so let's go back to our previous categories. I'm going to go ahead and put 7 and 8 under the heading of social reality. 7 was the wolf territories, and I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to assert that wolves have social constructions just as much as humans do. I'm certain someone will take me to task for that, but wolf territories are constructed by wolf behavior the same way that human countries are constructed by human behavior. And also in that category, I'm going to put citizenship, since citizenship seems to be an awful lot seems to be tied to national borders. All right, and then over here, the last group is these 4 items that are all forms of money. And I like using the example of money when I talk about social construction, because money is clearly real in that people worry about it a lot. You can't just announce that you don't believe in money and expect it to go away. At the same time, money is a product of a social process. And if enough people lose faith in a currency, that currency will go away. When the government of Somalia collapsed, the Somali currency lost its value. Or actually, a better example, because I don't know Somali history as well. When the Confederate Army was defeated, Confederate money ceased to be money, right? Because the process that socially constructed that went away. Money is funny, though, because it comes in it is tied into various degrees to physical reality. So paper money is tied to a physical reality the same way that the Texas-Mexico border is tied to the Rio Grande. But that relationship can get more and more abstract. So maybe that physical reality is just a computer record, so it's electrons on a hard disk somewhere. Maybe it's a bar of gold whose value fluctuates. Maybe it's just a promise, right? When you get to a very fundamental level of social reality, often what you're just trafficking in are promises. So these are all social realities. I'm going to go ahead and move them over there, but they're all very different. And so one of the things that this lets you know is that the whole idea of the social reality can become really complex really quickly. So now the question is, what is race? I'm telling you right now, race is not a physical reality like the Rio Grande or the moon. But what kind of social reality is it? Or is it a pure fiction like a dragon or a unicorn? So that's going to be the subject of the next video, and it's the next exercise you have to do, and the stuff in the second half of Charles Mills' essay.